So listen to this, if there's one thing football fans love, it's a crazy goalkeeper. There's nothing more entertaining than that. And look, there's a lot a keeper could do to be seen as weird or crazy or, outside of the box, but their number one party trick has to be scoring goals, which is just ironic. Regardless, plenty of keepers have become famous for scoring goals. René Higuita scored 43 over his career, Jorge Campos scored 46, and the great Chilavert blew them both out of the water, scoring 63. That already sounds absurd, but it's actually only the second most in history. There was another guy who scored more than twice as many as Chilavert, 131 goals scored by a goalkeeper. At his peak, in 2005, he managed 22 goals. For comparison, in that season, he managed to outscore Drogba, Michael Owen, Ibrahimovic, Beckham, and even that year's Ballon d'Or winner, the almighty Ronaldinho. He was an unreal player, so unbelievable he was nicknamed The Myth. Cause if you didn't get to see it, you wouldn't believe it. Saying he was 1 in a billion would be an understatement. As the São Paulo fans always said, everyone has a keeper, but only we have Rogerio Ceni. As you might imagine, he scored all of his goals either through penalties or the most impressive of all, free kicks. And I know you're probably wondering, how good does the keeper have to be at free kicks in order for the coach to pick him ahead of anyone else? Well, he only started taking them in his 6th season and still ended his career with the same number of free kicks scored as Maradona and Messi, just a few shy of Ronaldinho, and even Juninho, the all-time greatest free kick taker, only scored 15 more than Ceni. I think I've made my point. And still, don't get me wrong, he didn't just score goals, not at all. He was a phenomenal keeper. Despite never leaving South America, he still won seemingly everything there was to win, literally 10 different international trophies. And look, not to constantly mention the guy, but not even Ronaldinho, who's known for supposedly winning every trophy available, managed to win as many as him. The amount of records he broke is out of this world. The guy was like a glitch in the Matrix, the ultimate dead ball specialist. Not only could he score them, but he could also save them. I mean, listen, he literally holds the record for the most penalty saves in the history of the sport. And besides all of that, there's also a bunch of other records, like no one ever played more matches as a captain than him, or no one ever won as many matches for a single club as he did. He even managed to become the first and only ever player to be nominated to the Ballon d'Or without ever playing in Europe. But if you ask most European football fans about him, they don't even know who he is. But I really do think, had he come to Europe, they would easily consider him one of the greatest of all time. But you know what's funny? Despite all of these accomplishments, he got extremely close to not even becoming a football player. The stars that will align so many times in order for him to get where he is that it's almost unbelievable. Before he was even born, his mom was literally told to terminate her pregnancy as there was a high risk that either she or the baby could die at any moment, but she decided to risk it all and go through with it. Then there's the fact that for the longest time he only played as a fullback. He only found out he was great between the posts at 15 years of age because his team's keeper got injured, so he was forced to take over his spot simply because he was the youngest kid in the team. Then at about 18, his father forced him to reject his first ever proposal to play for a proper football club because he already worked in a bank, which his dad thought was a much more prestigious job. But thankfully, he was fired, which finally allowed him to join his first team, Sinop, in the 4th tier of Brazilian football, where he still was only the 3rd choice keeper. But again, lucky for him, just as they began to get strangely far into their regional championship, which in Brazil is a big deal, every other keeper in the squad got injured. Even at that point, taking the 18-year-old to go on goal for the team's greatest ever set of matches would have been insane, which led the board to begin looking for another keeper. But that's when the coach went ahead and told him Ceni was more than enough. They were so baffled by this decision they told him, sure, but if we lose, you're fired. And he still went ahead, and somehow Ceni ended up saving a last-minute penalty, leading Sinop to win their next match, setting them on their way towards winning the regional championship for the first time in the history of the club. Which then earned Ceni a tryout at São Paulo, where things finally got going, but not before one last coincidence, which was as tragic as it was impressive. So, for his first 3 years at São Paulo, he went back to playing in the academy, and his team was very successful, but Ceni was only the second keeper. São Paulo was even looking to send him out to a smaller team, as he was always getting outshined by his counterpart, Alexandre, a young keeper who was already getting plenty of shots at first-team football. As one of the team's scouts once claimed, Alexandre was much better than him, not just on goal, but with his feet too. These free kick things Ceni does, he already did it back then. But well, just as Alexandre seemed to be pushing for a place in the first team's starting 11, he went out with a few friends and after a night of partying, he decided to drive back home on his own. There was a road stretch that was covered in fog. Alexandre fell asleep at the wheel, collided brutally with the road separators, and ended up passing away on the spot. As a consequence of this, Ceni was called up to the first team to fill his spot. As that same scout would say, without that accident, today no one would even know who Rogerio Ceni is. But moving on to something a bit less grim. Despite not getting much game time in his first 4 seasons with the first team, Ceni had maybe the greatest timing ever, being handed medals for the Libertadores, the Intercontinental Cup and the Recopa Sudamericana, despite spending most of his time on the bench. Then finally getting some game time at the Copa Sudamericana, taking that trophy as well and impressing everyone enough to finally make it to the starting 11. However, something strange happened right after that. Muricy Ramalho, his coach, would constantly catch Ceni practicing free kicks after training, and even more surprising, he was freakishly good at it. So he approached him and jokingly told him to keep working at it, maybe one day he'd let him take a free kick in an actual match. But what he didn't realize was that Ceni was really not about to quit. And so 6 months and about 15,000 free kicks later, seeing that no one was working as hard as him, he made the shocking decision of appointing his goalkeeper as his new free kick specialist. And it paid off. 3 goals in that first year, another 3 in his second, which actually helped them win the state championship. By the third, he was taking penalties as well. By the fourth, he managed an incredible 7 free kick goals in a year, which is like Lionel Messi level of efficiency, and even managed to score a decisive free kick in the second leg of the final of the state championship to give São Paulo the title as they beat Santos 3-2. And just like that, suddenly, he was being handed the captain's armband. But despite that, honestly, the start of the century was a really rough time for Ceni, and I guess the best way to explain this is to address the elephant in the room. What about the national team? Well, contrary to what you may think, he did actually play for them, and trophy-wise he was once again very successful. The problem is that for some reason, he was almost always in the middle of some controversy. In '97, he was called up for the Confederations Cup and he even won the whole thing, but he ended up getting into a whole mess with the coach Mário Zagallo, with Ceni telling the press that he lacked leadership after some of his teammates shaved off his hair as a prank. And well, Zagallo got so mad at his comments, he literally never called him up again. However, by '98, Vanderlei Luxemburgo took over and took Ceni as his main keeper, but then he refused to take the blame for 2 goals they conceded, supposedly due to his mistakes, and the public turned against him, which made things difficult once more. By the time Scolari arrived, his chances became even fewer as the manager insisted on calling up Marcos, a keeper that he was personally close to. Still, in 2002, he did get called up to the World Cup, and despite not getting a single minute of game time, he did get to add that trophy to his resume, but unfortunately, that would be pretty much the last time he'd ever get to put on the yellow shirt, despite being only 29 at the time. In reality, as unassuming and well-behaved as he might look, Ceni had a tendency to get into controversies. Just a year before the World Cup, he was accused of forging a contract offer supposedly sent to him by Arsenal as a way to force São Paulo to increase his wages, which eventually led him to be banned from playing for 29 days and to rumors that he'd be kicked out of the club. But instead, not only did he end up getting the raise he wanted, he insisted the offer was real and even sued the journalist who broke the news for defamation and actually won the case. So, truly, who knows what happened there. Even after all of this, he still managed to send his team out of the Libertadores when they were one step away from the final, then lashing out against his critics once again, claiming he couldn't be criticized by people who can barely control a ball, which would only further infuriate the fans, leading them to start booing Ceni and requesting that he be dropped to the bench. But once again, suddenly the stars aligned, allowing him to hit a mesmerizing prime. So, the management pretty much just paid no attention to the fans and kept their faith in him, and as a result, he got back in good form and took them to the Copa Libertadores once again. And there, he finally got his redemption. After going unbeaten throughout the entire group stage, he went into the knockouts with a fire in him like never before, stopping every single shot Palmeiras took on goal throughout the two legs and then even scoring a penalty himself. Following this, he moved on to the quarterfinals versus Tigres and blew them away in a 4-0 victory that saw Ceni not just score one free kick, but two in the same match, at one point nearly joining Chilavert as the only keeper to score a hat-trick, but sadly, the third of his free kick attempts only managed to hit the bar. Add to all of this a last-minute penalty in the semi-finals and an heroic performance in the final, and not only had he taken the trophy, but he had put on one of the best goalkeeping performances of all time, getting the fans on his side once more and accumulating an absurd 5 goals in the competition. For a bit of perspective, Rubinho was the competition's second highest goal scorer, and he only scored one more than this freak of a goalkeeper. As you might imagine, Ceni was named the player of the tournament, but before you get all excited about his achievement, let me double down for you. Later that year, they went into the Club World Cup, and not only did Ceni come in clutch in the semi-finals, scoring the decisive goal in a 3-2 win against Al Ittihad, but he also put on a man-of-the-match performance in the final that led São Paulo to beat Liverpool and Ceni to once again take the Player of the Tournament award. By the end of the year, Ceni was a world champion, had established himself as the best goalkeeper in South America, and had scored 22 goals, including 10 free-kick goals. For comparison, the most Messi ever managed was 8. And still Ceni did not even get a nomination to the Ballon d'Or. Hard to find any other reason for that other than the fact that he didn't play in Europe, but thankfully, he wouldn't give up just yet. The following year, he found himself once again in the final of the Libertadores, once again somehow scoring some of the most decisive goals of the competition, but with 5 minutes to go in the final and the aggregate score tied at 3-3, Ceni made a massive cross and watched as his chance to double down on his success came to an end. However, there was one hope left. After 15 years without winning the league, São Paulo had a remarkable chance to take the title that season, and so Ceni dusted off his gloves and kept going, putting one of his best ever performances in a match that came right after the final. So, picture this, São Paulo was 2-0 down to Cruzeiro. The fans were quiet, like they were witnessing a funeral. After all, a defeat would have them go down to second place, and suddenly the referee points to the spot. Penalty for Cruzeiro. If they score, the game will be virtually out of reach for São Paulo, but right there, Ceni takes it all to the next level and saves the penalty. Still hyped from this save, a few moments later, the referee signals for a free kick. He runs the whole length of the pitch, takes the ball, and smacks it into the top corner. But still, he wasn't done. Come the second half, he went up the pitch again and scored a second free kick, tying the match and securing a single point for his team that not only kept their unbeaten streak alive, but also kept them at the top of the table when all seemed lost. Placar, the most successful newspaper in Brazil, had never awarded a player with a 10 out of 10 rating in their history, but that day, that came to an end. According to them, Ceni had put down the perfect performance. By the end of the year, São Paulo had indeed managed to take the title. Ceni won the award for the League's Player of the Year, the only ever goalkeeper to do so, and officially became the greatest player in the history of the club. And if that weren't enough, over the following 2 years, Ceni would lead the team not only to revalidate their title, but to make themselves 3-time national champions. The same number of titles the club had taken since its creation. In the second of those 3 seasons, Ceni pulled off not only an incredible 10 goals, but also managed to concede just 14 times in the 35 league games he played, allowing São Paulo to finish the year with a 15-point margin separating them from the rest of the table. As Ceni not only took the League's Player of the Year award once more, but also finally earned his nomination to the Ballon d'Or, one of the sport's most stunning achievements ever. The year after that third league title, Ceni broke his ankle. He was already 36 years old. His screams were enough to show the damage that had been caused, but regardless, he came back. By then, São Paulo were struggling to match the results of the previous years, but Ceni stuck by until he was 42 years old. He only won one more trophy over his career, his 10th and final international trophy, the Copa Sudamericana. By then, he was only able to train after taking intense painkillers, but he stayed because the team needed him, and nothing was more important than the team. So, in his final words as a São Paulo player, he told the fans he only had one request for them: for his ashes to be spread on the pitch on the day he died.